Charles, we're joined by yet another excellent guest today. We've got with us the author of The Biden Deception, George Neumayr. Hello, George.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, it's our great pleasure. Well, isn't the author of The Biden Deception Biden's parents? But it's a great book. It's just come out, I think, September 15th. We've had a chance to take a look at it. Why don't we open, George, with you giving us some of the high points or some of the important takeaways of this great new contribution?
Yeah, the theme of the book, of course, is that he Biden presents himself as a harmless moderate, but that's not what he is. He's a radical in moderate's disguise. That's the Biden deception. And the proof for that is seen in the positions he has taken over the last couple of years, which are increasingly hard left. He's in favor of open borders. He's in favor of tax hikes. He said that the very first thing he wants to do is eliminate the Trump tax cut. He wants to make Beto O'Rourke his gun czar. He's in favor of the Green New Deal. He made Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez the chairwoman of the working group that he formed with Bernie Sanders on environmental issues. So on issue after issue, I show in the book that he has not taken moderate positions. He's taken increasingly radical positions. And I argue that as president, he'll be even more left-wing than Obama was. I think his administration will combine the worst of the Obama years with the worst of the new Democratic Party under the influence of Bernie Sanders.
Well, I'm not a political person, although I have gotten involved exposing frauds, and those touch on the political system and may have affected some of it in 2016 and this year. But I remember the Democrat Party as being a party that included lunch pail working types across the country who just had a slightly different perspective than the country club Republicans. And these are decent folk. They came out in droves to get Reagan across the line in 80 and 84. And for the life of me, I don't understand how the Democrat Party could have moved so far with a Biden, with a Sanders, and AOC. Maybe you can explain that to our audience.
Well, it's really been moving in that direction, I would say, for at least since the Obama years. Obama represented a kind of far left detour away from the triangulation of Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton was trying to compete with the Republicans and offer a somewhat moderate message. But after the Clinton years ended, the party moved to the left under Obama, and it's just continued to move to the left. And you're right, it's a party that is very hard to recognize for anybody who would have been alive at the time of, say, Hubert Humphrey. It would have been inconceivable to somebody like Hubert Humphrey that the party could become the party of Black Lives Matter and the party of boycotting the flag and the party of late-term abortion, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, I share your dismay at the direction that the Democrats have taken.
Yeah, it's really shocking. I'm not shy about telling my age. I'm 64 years old, and I kind of got interested in watching history and what was going on in America in the late 60s when the riots were all over the place, and especially where I grew up in Greenwich Village. And one of the things I remember hearing from all of these young Democrats back then was, don't trust anybody over 30. And now what we're doing is we're running. You can only run for president if you're over 70 and of feeble mind. And then the next thing is back in the 60s, it was you got to be tolerant, of the flower children and all that kind of stuff. Why can't you embrace our new ideas? Give us a chance. Now it's the party of orthodoxy. It's, there is only one answer, and I will decide what it is, and I will cancel you if you don't embrace my idea. I mean, how does a Joe Biden move, and how does the Democratic Party move from the place it was in the late 60s to the place we find it in 2020?
I guess, the only probably adequate explanation for that is the change in culture in America. And that's been brought about, I think, largely by pop culture and academia, and Hollywood, which have all become very radical in their outlook. And I think that as liberals in this country have been influenced by those cultural influences, the party has responded to that and became, increasingly radical to reflect the base of the party. Yeah. It would have been, I guess even during the Obama years, the party was against gay marriage, for example, and now the party is in favor of transgenderism. One of the chapters in my book looks at a statement made by Joe Biden, which is that transgenderism is the civil rights issue of our time. That it would have been inconceivable for someone like Bill Clinton to run on a platform with that statement in it. But because the culture has changed and it's moved so intensely in that direction, I guess the party has had to catch up to the change in culture.
Yeah. Well, so one of the things I've noticed in all this, when I was in college, there was a program called the Chubb Fellowship at Yale, where famous people, world leaders and politicians would be invited to come live in our residential college and for a couple of days and hang out with the students. So the first person who I met through that program was Joe Biden, who was then a young senator. And he came to this room of 20 kids. We were 18, 19, 20-year-old kids. And in the space of 45 minutes, he knew everybody's name. It was really a riveting conversation. He was magnetic. He was on top of his game. As President Trump says now, night after night in these rallies, he's shot. I mean, this guy is it's really elder abuse to let him out of his basement, in my opinion. Yeah,
there's no question that he's lost his edge. And even the Democrats were the first ones to say that. As I document in my book, Andrea Mitchell and Cory Booker and people like that raised the issue of Biden's mental fitness a couple of years ago or a year and a half ago. And so it was really, this was a topic raised not by the Republicans first, but by the Democrats. And I would agree with you that this is a form of elder abuse to be rousting him out of bed at 11 o'clock at night so that he has to make a statement about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and he looks, barely awake. And I think this, poses a real problem for the upcoming debates. Somebody pointed out that, Biden may actually be suffering from what's called sundowner syndrome, right, which is a condition in which, the symptoms of early dementia become worse as the day goes on and become particularly bad in the evenings. And so I wouldn't surprise me if that problem presents itself at the evening debates.
Well, do you think he's actually going to go through with the debate, or there'll be some ruse?
I think he'll have to go through with the debates. It would be too politically costly not to.
Because honestly, when you contrast the spectacles that are the Trump rallies, I don't know if you saw the one last night, but I have never tried to address a crowd of bigger than a couple thousand people, and I couldn't imagine at his age doing what he's doing in his off time. And he is, after all, running the country. At the same time, he's running for re-election, and here he's jumping on these planes, age 74, no notes, extemporaneously communicating with tens of thousands of people, and really naturally. That's not I don't think you can learn that skill. I think you either have it or you don't. He's honed it. And against Trump, you've got a guy who can't actually complete a sentence. He can't read a teleprompter. I actually feel sorry for Biden, actually.
Yeah, it's the energy of Trump is truly amazing. He looks like he's in his early 60s, while Biden looks like he's almost 90. And exactly. Trump gives off the impression that he's been in a couple of states before Biden's even woken up in the morning. He's darting around here and there, and he keeps up an amazing pace. And if he wins, it'll be because he out-hustled Biden so dramatically.
Right.
You know, George, you on the cover of the book, you ask if Biden is a crypto socialist. Some of our viewers in the comments are intrigued by this. What did you mean by that exactly?
Well, it means that he's a socialist, but he doesn't advertise it. He's a secret socialist. And I would say that the strongest evidence for that is the reasoning that he gives for raising taxes. He wants to raise taxes not to finance the legitimate functions of government, which is the proper reason for taxation. Rather, he wants to raise taxes to spread the wealth around, to be a redistributor of wealth. And it's that understanding of taxation which is at the heart of socialism. And so I would say that Bernie Sanders, and who's an overt socialist, and Biden, they share the exact same conception of taxation. And so that's really where his crypto socialism is most evident.
Yeah, I mean, it would be unfair to force all politicians to take not a national security exam or something like that, but to pass an elementary economics course, which I don't think 50% of the politicians, and certainly probably 100% of the staffers and people not in your side of the media, but mainstream media, could pass. I think they should be forced to pass a basic arithmetic test. And no, 2 + 2 does not equal 5. I mean, the numbers these people are throwing around here, the 93 trillion Green New Deal is absurd. Gross GDP before the pandemic was something like 18 trillion a year, and gross GDP is not free money. I mean, that money is not the savings of a country in a given year. So to pile on a burden of $93 trillion on an economy that's thriving, and then to suggest you're going to raise taxes by $4 trillion, when this country is spending before, again, the extra impact of the pandemic, spending $6.5–7 trillion a year on government is just on its face absurd. But right. What can we do? What can you and this book do to help educate the average voter that these people are talking economic smack and very dangerous ideas?
Yeah, well, one of the ideas I'd like to convey in the book is that Biden is not a champion of the middle class. He's an enemy of the middle class. And when he says that he's going to eliminate the Trump tax cut, he is, whether he will admit it or not, aiming at the middle class's pocketbooks. The Trump tax cut was primarily benefited the middle class. And so if he intends to get rid of it, the taxes of the middle class are going to go up. And another reason why they're going to go up is that his budget plans are so extravagant and so prodigal that there's no possible way he could pay for the Green New Deal and the rest of it without raising taxes on the middle class. And so, I would urge members of the middle class to realize that their best interests do not lie with the Democrats, but with the Republicans. The Republicans have really become the party of the middle class. The Democrats are the party of the very rich and the very poor, but they don't particularly care about the middle class.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think it's really shocking. So going back into this a little bit, I'm sure you cover this in the book, and I'm sure some people remember what happened in '87 and '88 when Joe Biden tried the first time to be president of the United States. And I haven't seen them yet, but I'm sure by Election Day, there are going to be Trump and Friends of Trump ads that reprise what Biden claimed and then what he had to say when he dropped out of the race. And the fact that he lied then grievously does not go away because it was so long ago.
Right. And, I show in the book that his history of plagiarism goes all the way back to his days in law school. He got caught in one of his law courses ripping off a law review article. He took large chunks of the article and just put it into one of his papers for one of his courses. And he got caught, and he received an F on the the grade was an F, and he got a rebuke from the professor, and the administration even, I think, considered kicking him out of the school. So it really, the roots of his plagiarism problem run, pretty deep. And but that the '87 plagiarism scandal, as you say, really is a permanently defining moment in his career when he ripped off the speech of Neil Kinnock, the British politician Neil Kinnock, who was a socialist. And so it's very telling that he ripped off a socialist. And he not only he was not only stealing the ideas of this socialist, he was also stealing his biography, which, is an even more pathological version of plagiarism when you're fabricating your own biography based on somebody else's. So that's something that he's never really been able to live down. And his plagiarism and chronic lying problem have continued throughout the recent campaign. He got caught out lying about that visit he made to South Africa, where he said he had been arrested when he was trying to visit Nelson Mandela. It was completely bogus. He was never arrested. He was just temporarily stopped by the police, but he built that up into a big story about having been arrested. So, and then even when he was putting together the platform for his campaign, he ripped off some environmental papers from some environmental groups when he was composing the section on climate change. So this is not a problem that has ever been put behind him, really.
Exactly, and it's a despicable thing. I mean, it'd be one thing if you're a comedian to maybe use somebody else's joke, and
no, they hate that.
I know, but I'm just saying you're not a lawyer, you're not a senator, you're not vice president and trying to be president of the United States and hold the code to the nuclear weapons. You wake up on the wrong side of the bed and there goes Grenada. I mean, it would seem to me that if you are a proven liar, then your job is probably to be head of the Democratic Party, not as candidate, or maybe to work in mainstream media.
Yeah, he's one of the worst lies he told actually was he said that his first wife had been killed by a drunk driver.
Right.
That was totally false. There was an examination done of the accident, and the investigators found that the driver most responsible for the accident was Biden's wife. She went through a stoplight or a stop sign, and they found that the truck driver was completely sober and had been observing the traffic rules. And yet Biden, for years afterwards, would refer to the accident as an accident caused by a drunk driver, which had an embittering effect on the last years of the truck driver's life, according to his family, who've been trying to get an apology from Biden for years and years and years.
Yeah, that's really just horrible stuff. Well, tell us a little bit. First of all, he tries to describe himself as a coal miner, hard scrabble guy from Scranton, Pennsylvania. How true is that?
Well, he only spent the first something like 7 or 8 years of his life in Scranton. Uh-huh. And so right there, it's sort of misleading because his most formative years were spent elsewhere. And his father, was a used car salesman.
That makes sense.
which I think is a pretty telling biographical detail.
Right. I
think Biden got a lot of his blarney from his used car salesman father. Mm-hmm. And so he's this whole the man of Scranton thing is really pretty bogus. And he's portrayed himself as nearly penniless, when he was a senator, but in fact he lived in one of the homes that had been formerly owned by the DuPont estate, and it was a home that was actually bought for him or was given to him with some assistance from a credit card company, MBNA. Biden
Sure.
had the nickname the senator from MBNA because he pushed so much bankruptcy legislation that benefited credit card companies like MBNA. So the whole his whole working man image is full of holes. He comes from a family of lobbyists. 2 of his brothers are lobbyists. His son Hunter was basically a lobbyist, or And then his sister Valerie is a political operative who's enriched herself off her brother's campaigns. So he comes from a family of political operatives and lobbyists, and yet he's always portrayed himself as this sort of simple, independent politician who rides the Amtrak to work and is free of any of the normal influences on politicians. In fact, his entire career has been dominated by them.
Yeah, I seem to remember, I don't know whether it was this cycle or whether it was a previous cycle, that Biden positioned himself bragging. Maybe it was the 16th cycle, 15th. He was bragging about the fact that he, at his age, didn't own a single share of stock or investment. Now, to brag about that when you're 73 and then suggest that because you've never had any experience managing your own money legitimately, you ought to sit atop the largest economy in the world is kind of a stretch for me.
Yeah. Yeah. He's made millions in the last few years. He's now a multimillionaire. But yeah, we don't know. As you say, it's being penniless during your senatorial career is not exactly a strong argument for being a manager of an economy.
Well, you would know, having just completed this book, in his 47-year-long career, can you name 3 pieces of legislation, just one, if you could, piece of legislation that he shepherded through that had positive impact upon the U.S. economy, and that is something that showed great courage and skill in getting it across the line?
I would say there's no such legislation in his background. He, all he's really known for is going to bat for the credit card companies in Wilmington and Delaware. Yeah. And, he was just a hack politician who was representing their interests in Congress. And that's why he got on the wrong side of Elizabeth Warren and the Democratic Party, because he was helping the credit card companies squeeze consumers for their outstanding debts. And so it was really, Biden would probably say that that's an example of his moderation, but really it's only an example of his own self-interest. That's what he had to do to survive as a senator in Delaware.
And didn't MBNA, he had significant personal financial gain from all of this legislation that helped MBNA, didn't he?
Yeah, MBNA helped him buy a house. They hired Hunter Biden right out of law school. They gave his campaigns, tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of dollars. Byron York wrote a good piece on this in the American Spectator many years ago with the title, The Senator from MBNA. Yeah. And that really captures the essence of Biden's political career.
We recently had Byron on to talk about his book. But so in that whole area, my training is in investing and investment banking and things like that. And with interest rates where they have been ever since really before the pandemic, to have these credit card companies charging over-leveraged consumers 13%, 20%, and even higher interest rates that are not tax deductible. They stopped being tax deductible a long time ago. If I am a conservative type. I don't particularly like either party, but I would have thought that conservatives would be looking at this and saying, this is really bad. It's rapacious behavior against economically unsophisticated people who should be taught, look, you don't buy groceries on credit. That's just not, if you're doing that, you've got other problems. Let's sort of, for this guy to be living in a DuPont estate house in Wilmington, and by the way, why does he need such a big house if he's a Green New Deal type? Yeah. It's outrageous. So
it is, yeah.
On the Ukraine stuff, your book comes out at a great moment because we have this report that just hit the press. I was looking at it with Jason immediately before we came on air, and I noticed that the New York Times says, the headlines are like, Republican report on Ukraine says shows no exposure for Biden or something like that. Whereas John Solomon's reporting is quite different. I don't know if you've had a chance to read the report or read summaries of the report. Where do you come out on what the Biden family has been doing in Ukraine?
Well, I think the Solomon report is the one to read, and that's really the accurate one. There's no doubt that Hunter Biden was trading on his father's influence, and even the Obama people knew that and were worried about that and had discussions about that. They said, this is a blatant conflict of interest for Biden to have his son, pulling down so much money from this company, in a field where he had zero expertise. And I found the report interesting because it shows that Hunter was getting even more money from Ukraine than we even realized. It's in the it's over $13 million at least. Yeah. Wow. So that's really pretty shocking, and Biden has to answer for that. Why he thought it was a good idea to let his son do that.
Yeah.
Well, more to the point, didn't he initially say in the beginning that he knew nothing about it? That he didn't talk to his son about business, and other than to say, be careful.
But even if he did speak to him about business, it's totally conceivable that he would still know nothing about it.
Well, so in the whole business of watching the Democrats and watching the Clintons and watching this Ukraine mess, what I've come to appreciate is when the leading Democrats accuse the other side of something, chances are they're actually doing that something. So they accuse the Trump team of colluding with Russia. There has been, I think, a lot of credible reporting from you and from others and from John Solomon that indeed the elements in the Ukraine government and actually elements in the Russian oligarch group were very interested in seeing a Clinton presidency and fearful of Trump. And some of these names that are coming out, particularly when we look back over the spectacle of the impeachment, the ham-handed way in which that was carried out, the fact that we can't know the name of the actual accuser, whistleblower. What I see in your book, what I see in this report, and in general on Ukraine, tells me that the Ukrainians were a lot more heavily invested in Hillary. And a name that I'm familiar with, Jason and I talk about a lot, is Victor Pinchuk. Have you run across him?
I have not.
So it's Pinchuk. Victor Pinchuk is an oligarch who is married to the daughter of one of the former early presidents of Ukraine, and they're very wealthy. He has been tagged with, he's a big donor to the Clinton Foundation, as is his wife. That's a separate foundation. And the Clinton Foundation started doing work that we know about in Ukraine in 2004. So there's a long and close association of the Clintons with this particular oligarch. This oligarch knows how to oligarch. I mean, he knows how to do it without marrying his wife, who was the daughter of one of the big people over there. And so I'm just amazed that the Trump side is so passive here and is saying, we're going to put up with this. We'll let Mueller go his route. We'll let all this stuff out. When there's so much meat in your book, in Solomon's reporting about corruption involving Democrats and, frankly, Romney's son in the Ukraine.
Right. Yeah. It's a too neglected an issue, and it really should be brought to the forefront by the Trump campaign.
Yeah. So go ahead, James.
Was it Romney's son or John Kerry's son?
Both.
Oh, I didn't realize Mitt Romney's son was involved in this.
And the deal was so rotten that even Kerry's son had to get out of it.
Yeah.
Kerry's son knew that it was a rotten deal.
See, in that case, Kerry's son is an heir to a large fortune. So, I mean,
Biden's son is an airhead, so it's a good combo.
But people who are, going to inherit a lot of money have lawyers around them who train them to be very careful. He had a lot to lose if this thing blew up. So, who else talk to us a little bit about Biden's brother. Is it James Biden?
Yeah, there's two brothers who are lobbyists, James and Frank. And James was the brother who, I believe it's, if I'm not confusing them, I think it was James who got all the contracts in Iraq for in the housing. He got these housing contracts in Iraq. Even a construction firm in Iraq hired him, and he had no experience whatsoever in that. And this was at a time when, this was during the Obama years. So people who've looked at this think that it stinks to high heaven that he got these contracts without any experience. And then the other brother, Frank, I believe, got a bunch of, he got work as with a charter school management company. And that too is thought to have been simply trading on his last name. This was during the Obama years. And he had no experience with charter schools. And that management company ended up getting huge contracts from the federal government under Obama. And so that too has been looked at, and people think that smells to high heaven as well.
Yeah.
George, what is your feeling about America in 2020, where any wild accusation leveled against Donald Trump is immediately presumed to be true? And no matter how much evidence we seem to have of this type of activity actually being carried out by Joe Biden and members of his family, they refuse to believe it, accept it, investigate it at all.
Right. Yeah. The only people on the left who take this stuff seriously are the people on the really far left. Sort of like the maybe the Nation crowd, but I document in the book some leftists who've raised issues about the Biden family trading on their brother's last name. But yeah, most of this criticism is only coming from the right, and the mainstream media shows no interest in it whatsoever, even though they go on and on about how the Trump family is supposedly enriching itself off their father's last name. They show no interest in the fact that almost the entire Biden family has been doing that, trading on his last name for their entire lives.
Yeah, what we talk about on this show, Jason and I, we go back. I like to go back to about 1988. Jason goes back to the 60s, but I like to stop it in 88 because that's when America began to truly embrace and promote globalism. And you look at the hard data, which is out there. The U.S. government publishes some pretty good estimates, long time series data that shows the plight of the middle class person has really been horrible from 1988 to the present. And as you were saying earlier, the politicians basically take the MBNA bribes, and they take this bribe and the Clinton Foundation stuff. And speaking as somebody who is more involved with bigger deals, one tragedy here is if you're going to be corrupt, at least price your corruption services appropriately. I mean, they sold out for $7 million, $13 million, transactions that have enriched the Chinese and the Indians to the tune of the trillions and the tens of trillions of dollars. And I'm hopeful, depending on how the election turns around, that maybe we'll finally see exposure of this massive corruption and miscreants and criminals brought to justice. What's your view? Are you hopeful that the swamp will get drained based on what you've seen here?
Yeah, the only way it gets drained is if Trump wins re-election and then uses his second term to really go after this stuff. If the Democrats win, the swamp returns to power. There's no swampier politician than Joe Biden, and he intends to bring back, as I document in the book, he intends to bring into his administration all the swamp creatures from the Obama years. All the Susan Rices and the Eric Holders and that cast of characters from the Obama years who've spent decades in D.C. They're all going to reappear in the Biden administration.
What would Eric Holder do in a Biden administration?
Well, he probably,
run his mouth and say a bunch of dumb crap.
Well, I mean, he had the highest position for which he's qualified, Attorney General. I mean, what else could he get?
Well, he probably wants to be put on the Supreme Court after Biden selects a woman. If Biden got two or three choices, he'd want to be one of them.
I saw Eric Holder making some comments about there's a push now to make Washington, D.C. a state, to make Puerto Rico a state, add more senators. They're talking about adding more justices to the Supreme Court. What is up with the Democrats just kind of moving the goalposts to wherever they want it, change? I mean, they were the ones who said that Trump and his supporters need to commit to accepting the results of the election. Then they lost, and now not only will they not accept the results, they don't even like the country anymore, they don't like the Constitution, the laws, they want to change everything.
Hillary really let the cat out of the bag when she said Joe Biden should not concede the election under any circumstances. That captures the essential spirit of rebellion that you're talking about, which the Democrats always claim that the Republicans are doing, but in fact it's they who are doing it. And they've been questioning elections and refusing to accept elections, going all the way back to Al Gore and all of that. They never accepted that election. And yet it's the Democrats who have a history of stealing elections. JFK famously stole the election from Richard Nixon, with the help of his father, who got the mafia in Chicago to generate votes for his son. And so I would say it's the Democrats who have a lot to answer for with respect to stealing elections.
Exactly. And why is it that Bernie and the Democrats are being so quiet about the last two primary cycles? I mean, in the 2015 to producing Hillary cycle, it's crystal clear to me that the Clintons manipulated, rigged the Democratic side, they probably even encouraged Trump to run and thought that they'd just crush him in an October surprise, but that didn't work for them. So they tried to rig it, in my view, in 15, 16. They certainly rigged it in 19 and 20, at least on the Democratic side, going from Bernie should have been the candidate by all rights, I would think. And yet you get stuck with this guy who thinks the best way to campaign is to stay in his basement.
Yeah, it is strange. There may be a sort of Faustian bargain that the Sanders people have reached with the powers that be in the Democratic Party, to the effect that Sanders gets to really run or control the substance of the Democratic Party, while Biden serves as a deceptive frontman for the party. And you can see that in that silly working group that Biden formed with Bernie Sanders, which produced a manifesto that reflected Bernie Sanders' agenda more than Biden's.
Well, I think that manifesto was the work product of a bunch of very schooled seventh graders. I mean, it was ignorant of history, and it was ignorant of reality. It was ignorant of the economy, and it's a joke. It's gibberish.
Yeah, it's on the level of AOC. She's.
Oh, yeah. I was going to ask, what do you make of AOC nominating Bernie Sanders at the DNC? Like, why would they allow her to do that, go against the candidate? You Google AOC Biden, there's no pictures of them together. You would think, minus the sniffing, it seems like Bernie Sanders and AOC are dating. That is a kind of, it's a good indication of how weak Biden's hold on the party actually is, that they let AOC do that. And he is exactly what Donald Trump says he is, just a puppet of the far left.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I've noticed, and Jason's noticed, is when you go back over, let's say, the last 4, 8, 12 years, what's happened in this country, it seems to me, is that people who used to be forced to make a choice would either be Democrat or Republican. They would not reflexively say, well, I'm independent, because if you're interested in politics, the independents don't have to caucus with somebody, et cetera, et cetera. But in the 15-16 cycle and now in the 19-20 cycle, I believe that the percentage of people who are truly independent, who are going to vote in this election, could be as high as 35% of the turnout. I don't think it's down at 10 or 20. And I severely question whether there are more people who identify as Democrats in a turnout than the people who identify as Republicans. So I think the mix in all these polls that are used to scare everybody and to set up the idea that Biden was always going to win and Trump has stolen the election with the help of the Russians again, I think that's all bogus.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think these polls just vastly undersample Trump supporting independents or Republicans. I always just assume that they're off by about 5 percentage points.
Yeah. Great.
Well, let's, for a minute, George, if we could take you back to Frank Biden. There was this article in the Daily Mail. Dieter in the comments shared this with us here. It's this goes back a little bit, but it's talking about how Joe Biden's brother Frank was in another car crash going 80 miles an hour, killed the guy, lost some lawsuit where he owes them $1 million in the judgment, and he's done nothing. What do we think of this?
Yeah, the family of the victim has been rightfully pestering Joe Biden to get his brother to pay up, and Joe Biden just blew them off. He has not responded to their inquiries, this is just another example of that Biden doesn't come from a hardscrabble background. He comes from a privileged background where he can his brother can get away with something like this.
It's unbelievable. And then they try to show us videos of Joe Biden taking a personal interest in a young boy. I think this was even in the DNC, right? There was that young boy who had a stuttering problem, and that was so important to Joe Biden. Killing a dude, he doesn't have time for that phone call. But if you have a stuttering problem and you can appear in a video, you're my guy.
Yeah.
Pretty shameless.
Yeah. Now, George, you're an editor with The Spectator, isn't that right?
Yeah, I'm a senior editor with The Spectator. I write a couple of columns a week for them.
Mm-hmm. And people can see that at spectator.org. They can also find you on Twitter. Now, this is an interesting thing that appears at the top of your Twitter page here. People can follow you at George_Neumayr. But do you want to tell us about what's going on with the graphic featured on the GoFundMe?
Oh, it's a somewhat ironic use of a photo of me on a wanted poster that was hanging in the Basilica of the National Shrine in Washington, D.C., which was a result of my reporting on the corrupt Cardinal of Washington, D.C. I was exposing some of his shenanigans and his lying and his lavish living. And as a consequence of that, I found myself on a wanted poster at the Basilica of the National Shrine. And so I have a GoFundMe page, which I ask people, if they support the kind of investigative journalism that I was doing there, to support it.
And people can still do that, right? The page is
active. And they can still do that if they want, yeah.
Very close to the goal. So hopefully viewers will look more into George's journalism, and people can go to GoFundMe and look up this page here, George Neumayr's Journalism Fund, and help George complete that. It sounds like very important work that you're doing there. I'm sure there's a ton more stuff we want to talk about. What else is on your mind, George, about Joe Biden, the coming election, everything that's been going on?
Well, I think we've covered a lot of it, but I would like to think that my book could serve as essential pre-election reading for anybody who's sort of wavering, anybody who's on the fence about the election. I think I put in one place all the information that people will need to go into the voting booth informed. And I think that this election is as important as everybody is saying it is. The stakes could not be higher. We are at a kind of turning point in this country. We can either, maintain our wholesome and important traditions, or we can completely depart from them and enter into the fundamental transformation of the country that Obama talked about and that Biden intends to complete. And I think that fundamental transformation of the country is going to be very scary, and it'll end up turning this country into a left-wing dystopia.
Well, one of the things that's troubled me about Biden, beyond the excellent reporting in your book, is the way he interacts with people. The politicians I've encountered, and I try to stay as far away from them as possible, but those I have encountered tend to have a gift for putting you at ease, and they don't try to instigate fights in the first breath. But this guy is the definition, Biden, of intolerance. I mean, right up in the face of any critic, really aggressively so, in a way that is very problematic when you put that in the menu of his plagiarism, his repetitive plagiarism. And it would seem to me that if he were to apply for a job at a big company, he'd fail out on a personality test. And that's before you get to the Me Too allegations.
Here's Listen Fat.
Yeah.
He's insulting the guy. Like, it's ridiculous. And people are applauding. Yeah. Listen Fat.
And look at the sign language person, who's kind of overweight.
Well, she can't listen.
And then, he attacked that auto worker, remember, in Detroit, or, who came up to him and questioned his stance on the Second Amendment. And he called that guy a horse's ass. And,
he pony boy.
Pony soldier.
Yeah. So, that's one of the arguments I make in my book, is that he's neither moderate in his views nor in his temperament. He's actually a pretty irascible, ruthless guy.
One other thing, you don't necessarily judge a person by their marriage partner, but Whoopi Goldberg extolled Jill Biden's qualifications to serve on the coronavirus task force thing because she's a medical doctor, when in fact she's not a medical doctor.
Oh boy.
And I believe you know about that. And then in addition, her first husband, and of course, first husbands are oftentimes not enamored of their former wives, but her first husband is a big Trump supporter. Yeah.
And that's another possible lie by Biden. The first husband says that Joe Biden busted up his marriage, basically. Yeah. But Biden has always portrayed that romance as perfectly innocent and happening after her first marriage.
Right, because we call him, Jason has a great graphic, the plagiarizer dummy. Yeah. I mean, that sums it up for us, that he's a plagiarizer dummy. So where's the best place to get multiple copies of your book? We've got various holidays coming up, and Christmas and other festive occasions. Where would you send people to get your book?
Probably Amazon is the best place to go, but it's available at Barnes & Noble's website. And of course, it's available at the bookstores, any bookstore that is open these days. So, but I guess
not though, George. They seem to have a dearth of conservative authors' books, while they're overwhelming everybody with junk from the likes of.
It's incredible. I don't know the last time you were up here, but the main Barnes & Noble store left in Manhattan, and I do use the word left advisedly, is on, I think, 18th Street and Union Square. And it was closed for quite a while, but it opened up recently. And sometimes we don't get review copies in time, so we have to go up and try to buy the book. I was unable to get Byron York's book, for example, but there were 50 books, 50 editions of Michael Cohen's Turgid book. And any left-leaning book, they're piled up at Barnes & Noble. But you can never find books by. Have you thought of having your own book portal like Lou Dobbs and others? They have, you could have GeorgeNeumayr.books.com.
Yeah, that is a good idea, and I should look into that. You're right.
Good.
Now, one final question, George, because I think we would be remiss if we didn't ask you if Biden passes the smell test. Everyone's noticed that he's very into sniffing extremely young girls and making them super uncomfortable.
Yeah, that is one of the chapters in my book is called Creepy Joe, and he is an inveterate sniffer of women's hair, both of the old and the young. And even there's a picture of him sniffing Ruth Bader Ginsburg's hair.
Whoa.
So
hopefully before she died.
Yeah. So, I hope for Americans he doesn't pass the smell test and they vote for Trump.
Wow. I've just found, it's in The Spectator. So there we go. Joe Biden sniffing. There you go. She seems to enjoy being sniffed.
Oh my God. I remember, I don't know if you remember this moment, both of you, but I remember, I think it was after Biden was announced as the candidate to run with Barack Obama, that the two couples went out in some auditorium or whatever, and Joe made a big point of kissing Michelle Obama on the lips. And when I was married, if if a close friend of mine came over and kissed my wife on the lips, I'd deck him. I mean, it's just, you don't do that.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
anyway, George, well, thank you for giving us so much of your time. And I would guess you're not going on a formal book tour because travel's difficult. But
Yeah, I know. But
we try to only showcase books that we think are good. And so we're honored to have you with us. We hope to come back sometime, and stay safe down there.
thank you very much. I appreciate your having me. Thank you a lot. Thanks a lot.
Thank you,
Great
George.
to meet you. Thanks, George.
Thank you.
Well, there you go, Charles.
Yeah, it's a
George
real,
Neumayr.
real treat.
Yeah.
The journalism that comes out of the American Spectator, of course, any good journalism is going to be derided by people on the left. But they have, over decades now, steadily produced high-quality, insightful, groundbreaking articles. So we talk about the Paula Jones Troopagate story, which, of course, was written by David Brock when he was still conservative, in theory. That story was financed by Peter Smith.
Yeah.
Or my friend anyway.
Well, but that's a big deal because it shows he's got a history of kind of dogging the Clintons, and it's so interesting, the stories that Shane Harris wrote about Peter Smith that don't seem to conform with the truth.
Well, why would Shane Harris do that? Why would he focus on the truth?
I don't know, but when I asked him about it, he told me that they were scurrilous accusations, and then he hung up the phone.
Yeah. Well, Jason, we on the weekend, we had our broadcast, I think, interrupted, and whether that was by design or by accident, who knows. But sometimes it's better to be lucky than smart, and we were, I think, a bit lucky in the way we framed the analysis. And I wonder if we can't, in a few, maybe the next half hour or so, take people through some of these documents that I was referring to on the walkabout.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think they're quite interesting. I've noticed, for example, Google News, and it may just be that because I focus on certain things, Google serves me stories they think I'll like. But I don't think that's the case. I think the top Google News stories are people think about it and they want to give focus to these top stories. So we did some analysis of Barry Diller, a name you hadn't heard about until we got onto the broadcast. And then the next day, there are stories all over the place about Barry Diller and the trouble that Barry Diller is in with Expedia, which of course you would expect that company to be in trouble given the way
Nobody's traveling.
Nobody's traveling, and therefore nobody's reserving travel, and therefore nobody's searching for deals on Expedia. So you would expect that to be a problem. But in that walkabout, what I started by focusing upon was the degree to which Chelsea Clinton and the folks who have employed her, both at IAC and Expedia, unfortunately for each of them, have been lying about Chelsea Clinton's qualifications to serve on the board of a large publicly traded company like IAC. So let's go into, if we may, here's a summary of the story, but I don't know how much experience our viewers have looking at proxy statements, but proxy statements are the documents that go out, typically now electronically, but used to go out in the mail, to every shareholder. Indeed, if you have one share of stock, you get a proxy statement, and it takes you through the many different things that are of potential importance to a shareholder, including who's going to serve on the board, what are their qualifications to be on the board, how much money do they make for being on the board, and what are they expected to contribute to the board. And those statements that go out on the proxy statement, think of it like a serious marketing document. It's not the teaser for a book or the teaser for a speech. This is something that's regulated by the Securities and Exchange Commission. And if you lie in a proxy statement, that is not good. Not only do you have to make sure that any statement that's in there is truthful, but you also have to make sure that you don't omit a material fact that if somebody knew about it would change his or her decision to invest in the stock. So
Right.
if we could just pull up the 2012 on Google, I hope we'll be able to do this easily. If not, I'll talk until we can find it. The 2012 IAC proxy statement. And we may get a different year. There you go. That's a schedule. Yeah, there you go. All right, let's see what year this is for. If we keep going, it'll keep going down. If you just go down the document a little bit, it'll give you the date up there. Yeah, okay, May 10th, 2013 is good enough.
Chelsea joined 2011.
She joined in 2011. Here's Barry's signature. It's one of those Trumpian signatures. And there's the address of where we were. It talks about the number one piece of business is to elect 14 members of IAC's board of directors. So if we go down the page, it's going to talk about each of those directors. You'll see the table of contents here, slowly. Election of information concerning director nominees. So we hit that. Okay, and we have Gregory R. Blatt. Now,
Oops.
Gregory R. Blatt, the mall rat. Wasn't there a movie about?
I tried to make it larger and it got us lost in the document here.
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay, so scroll down. You got Blatt. You've got Edgar Bronfman is a very wealthy individual from the Seagram's fortune. Now Chelsea Clinton. Now Jason, what age was she?
33,
There
Charles.
you go. All right, so she's been a director of IAC since September 2011, right? Yeah. And this says that since September 2011, Ms. Clinton has also served as a member of the boards of the directors of the Clinton Foundation, okay? So it's not the William J. Clinton Foundation, or it's not William J. Clinton Foundation, it's not Bill, Hillary, and Chelsea Clinton Foundation, it's something called Clinton Foundation.
Oh, that's
and
new.
the Clinton Health Access Initiative, okay? Now, it says she currently serves as a special correspondent for NBC News.
Really?
That got attracted a lot of negative publicity. She would inform people at NBC News that when she was walking down the hall, like her mom, don't talk to me, don't look at me.
Really?
Yeah. And she got a lot of trouble for being all high and mighty.
Wow.
And then she also worked as an associate in McKinsey & Company.
Right.
Which I call bullshit on, because to be an associate, you generally have to have an MBA, an advanced degree, and I'm not certain that maybe she had an advanced degree from August 2003 to October 2006.
She's on the board of the directors of the American Ballet. Does she know anything about ballet?
She's probably been to a few.
But don't you have to be like an expert ballerina to be on the board of that?
Typically, for stuff like that, you've got to be an expert contributor, which is what, when my ex-wife was chairman of the Tri-State Center for the Performing Arts, and I willingly, it wasn't tons of money, but, 10,000.
But she probably knew a lot about art. I mean, Chelsea Clinton being on the board of the American School of Ballet is like me being on the board of the National Hockey League.
Right. So it says since September 2011, she's served as a member of the boards of these entities. Okay. We've shown before, Ms. Clinton lives in Manhattan. IAC is in Manhattan. And you would think that the lawyers for this firm, for IAC, would say, well, before we write this stuff about Chelsea, let's make sure that there's something called the Clinton Foundation in New York, and there isn't. Let's make sure that the Clinton Foundation is actually a tax-exempt nonprofit, which it wasn't. Let's make sure that the Clinton Health Access Initiative has been run well, which it isn't. And let's not omit the biggest and grossest thing that Chelsea was involved with.
Hillary.
You want to omit and edit that one. No, let's not omit the fact that she was on the board of the Clinton Global Initiative. They leave that off here.
Why?
Because it's very embarrassing. The Clinton Global Initiative never bothered. They incorporated the damn thing on September 4th, 2009. They held a meeting later in September 2009 at which Barack Obama spoke. They didn't have bylaws in place. They didn't formally organize the entity until August of 2010. And they never registered the thing validly to solicit inside New York. Meanwhile, something called the Clinton Global Initiative began operating as early as November 15th or 16th or thereabouts, 2004. Something called Clinton Global Initiative became an internet-based domain name, And they held meetings at 5 and 6 and 7 and 8. And then in the application for seeking federal tax exemption at 9, the application seeking federal tax exemption that was filed in August of 2010, they don't disclose anything at all about these predecessor activities, nor do they explain that Chelsea Clinton, as the likely sole heiress to the vast Clinton fortune, which was vast, that her parents, that Bill rather, had signed in April or May of 2010, a 5-year deal where he ultimately collected $17.6 million from the joint venture partner in Clinton Global Initiative University. Laureate. They don't disclose any of that here, and they repeat all this verbiage, and they say, in nominating Ms. Clinton, the board considered her broad public policy experience. Now, I thought it was really, not cool to refer to a woman as a broad.
That's what I was going to say, but I didn't want to interrupt with a joke.
So I scooped you on that one. But
yes, it's racist.
Name the public policy experience that Chelsea Clinton has, other than being the grifter daughter of 2 grifters. I mean, I don't know that she has any real public policy experience.
How common is it for somebody, I guess you could be pretty accomplished in business. Elon Musk had already sold PayPal by the time he was 33, but how often are members of boards of directors 33?
Very seldom.
They're older people with experience,
it really
right?
depends on the type of company. This is IAC is more on, I would argue it's closer to the internet and closer to techie stuff. So maybe you would see more people close to her age.
It's not a traditional internet company in that some 20-year-old invented something at their house and made billions. It seems like Barry Diller just came along with his crew of old, weird, rich billionaires who bought up every internet company and stuck them in a box.
Right, but if we could just go back to that, because I wanted to just...
We will, but I just sometimes do that to change up the shot, and I'll be ready with it when...
All right, sorry, because I just wanted to finish the one thing that's on there that's interesting to me that we haven't talked about, and that is that it talks here about the reason she was put on the board was, it says here, broad public policy experience and then keen intellectual acumen. Okay, you are rich by September 2011. Chelsea Clinton is rich. She lives in an expensive apartment. She's newly married. Her husband has got a hedge fund brewing. She's going to inherit a lot of money. And in September of 2011, she did not join the board of the Clinton Foundation. According to later filings, she joined the board on May 9th, 2011. At that time, the name of the entity, in theory, was William J. Clinton Foundation. However, in practice, the entity William J. Clinton Foundation had no articles of incorporation, had no bylaws, had never filed a tax return for 97, had filed false tax returns for every year since then, had procured audits that were garbage for 2001 to 2005, and fanciful fake audits from 2005 right through this period. How much diligence does this rich person do to agree to come on the board of that, and also on the board of Clinton Health Access Initiative, which at the time had been under investigation by the government of France for it being the largest contributor to something called Clinton Health Access Initiative via Unitate. It was under investigation for that, a mature investigation. Her mother's the Secretary of State in this time frame, and she decides she's going to lend her, quote, good name to being a director. On the basis of these boneheaded decisions, they decide at IAC to put Chelsea Clinton on the board. Now, why do you think they did that?
Oh, I have a reason in mind, but I have a feeling you're going to tell us.
All right. So if we go into the WikiLeaks Podesta dump, and then we search the Podesta emails, one below it.
Oops.
Yeah, that's it. So let's search on Simpson Thatcher, but misspelled. S-O-N.
S-O-N?
S-I-M-P-S-O-N, Simpson Thatcher, T-H-A-T-C-H. And let's see what happens. Okay, Wednesday debrief, November 21st. This is from Chelsea.
Open that.
Yeah. This is the 20th of November 2011. As we've emailed or discussed, or you've discussed with my father, that being Bill Clinton, we will be having a private and confidential oral debrief with Victoria Bjorklund and Jennifer Reynoso. Those are two very senior lawyers at Simpson Thacher. But I think Bjorklund is not spelled that way. It's Bjorklund, and I think. And Jennifer Reynoso may or may not have been a partner on Wednesday. As it's Thanksgiving evening, think about that. How many times have you had a business meeting Thanksgiving evening?
That'd be never.
Right. I mean, most people
Nobody is doing that.
Right. You only do that because you're trying to hide something.
And she did spell Victoria Bjorklund wrong. It's Lund, L-U-N-D.
Right. As it's Thanksgiving, and as it's, should be I-T''S. It is Thanksgiving Eve.
Well, she's a PhD, Charles.
Yeah, I know. She's a diarrhea expert.
Can't be bothered with that.
Punctuation, no. Surgery the day before. Bruce has a doctor's appointment at 1:30. It makes the most sense for us to meet in Chappaqua. Going later, if need be, and debriefing with Bruce afterwards.
Don't mind the plastic on the floor. I'm repainting.
Right, and then Simpson Thacher will set up a confidential conference call. Now, Simpson Thacher is a place I worked for 3 months in 1974, the summer of 1974, and it is not spelled T-H-A-T-C-H-E-R. It's T-H-A-C-H-E-R. And the point here being that in my experience in deals, it is quite normal to want to have an oral meeting first. You don't want, if you've hired people in a complex mess where people could go to jail, including the former president and the sitting Secretary of State, the last thing you want is a Doug Band memo saying, I herein confess to the following crimes. I did this wrong and that wrong and another wrong.
Right.
Or a Kamiki Gibson memo. You want the people to study the file. You want them to come to a place that is untappable, which in theory Chappaqua might be, and you want to sit down and you want to go over what the issues might be, and you don't want to take notes, and you don't want a formal report. So that's why you never send a freaking email memorializing that to the group involved.
Let me ask you this, Charles. If Bill Clinton was your father, might you request an in-person meeting rather than an oral meeting?
I knew you were going there.
Bad choice of words, I think.
Yeah. So in thinking about Chelsea Clinton, this is not very smart behavior. And mind you, this is 2 months into being a director of IAC. Because of course the real issue, now this, if you punch in Victoria Bjorklund spelled properly, and then with the word New York Nonprofit Corporation Law.
A nonprofit?
Yeah, you should come right up. Right, if you're trying to come up with somebody, there you go. LexisNexis. Just hit that one. Okay, this is a book for nerds like me. I mean, this is very long, complicated book with look how expensive it is, $265. She's
it's a loose leaf binder.
Well, yeah, because they update it constantly. And so this is Victoria Bjorklund is one of the world's authorities on New York nonprofit corporation law. And she charges a lot of money. I don't think she's retired out of Simpson Thacher now, but she charges a tremendous amount of money to study New York nonprofit corporation law. So chances are she might know something about New York nonprofit corporation law. And there you see the correct spelling of the name, T-H-A-C.
Bartlett also.
It's always Simpson Thacher and Bartlett. So, and she was director, pro bono legal counsel, chairs the board of advisors for Doctors Without Borders. So she has extensive experience not only about New York nonprofit corporations, but about nonprofit corporations that operate internationally. So she wouldn't need to use what I was like in 1974. I was basically a proofreader, but I would go on certain paralegal assignments. And the kind of stuff you might ask an 18-year-old to do today would be say, all right, like as a first step, the Clinton Foundation has been asked to give us all of its bylaws, all of its articles, any amendments, all of this. Let's take a look in the internet file and let's see what happens when we start. Let's start. Let's do a little bit of it, okay? Let's look in New York entity search, and let's do a few tests here. Now, if I were to work for somebody else, I would charge a lot more than Victoria Bjorklund, and I'm not charging for this, but let's just punch in the Clinton Foundation. And this is with the FON. And again, you have to do it, the Clinton Foundation. In the entity name, and the number you need to punch in is 11016. Okay, and then we search the database, none. Now, I separately, when I saw this result for many things, even today, freaking today, September, what is it, the 23rd, 2020,
yeah,
there is no such thing as the Clinton Foundation registered in New York, which is kind of where a whole bunch of offices of the Clinton Foundation are located. There could be a whole bunch of like bank accounts scattered around the city in various places. And we've separately in the past, this is current through yesterday, we've in the past pointed out that you need to, if you're going to use a name other than your legal name in New York State, you have to register that name in every county in New York State. And there are 5 counties in New York City alone. And they're up in Westchester, they're elsewhere, who knows where else they're from. So there's nothing registered for the Clinton Foundation, yet the brilliant lawyers at IAC allow, even today, the proxy statement to go out and say that she joined the board of the Clinton Foundation in September of 2011. Now let's go into the NYS Charity Bureau search, see what we see there. We couldn't do this while we were walking around, so that's why we're doing it today. And we punch in, the fastest way is the EIN 31-158-0204. And you hit search below. And up, it takes a little while typically, because Tish James is busy suing Donald Trump, so the site runs really slow.
I think she's getting bogged down by letters from George's brother.
All right, so this says, okay, registration statement. It shows a certificate of incorporation. Let's hit that one. Okay. This was filed on the 9th of July, 2009. So, and this says, and I don't...
Oh yeah, Charlie Daniels. Daniels, I forgot about that. He went down to Georgia.
Exactly. Okay, now this shows that all this is a certificate of amendment of a nonprofit corporation. All right? Now, the IRS requires that you cannot simply provide the amendment. You have to provide what is a conformed copy, meaning if you're going to change Article 1 from what it was to now the name of the organization shall be the William J. Clinton Foundation, a good lawyer, and that's certainly not Bruce Lindsay, and it's certainly not a good chief financial officer, Andrew Kessel, a good lawyer would say, well, if you're going to change that sentence, is it possible that the old sentence used the term corporation? The name of the corporation is the William J. Clinton Foundation, and that they made that corporation, lowercase corporation, a defined term that would operate throughout the balance of the document. So that when you make this change, what you're doing, because you're not defining organization as corporation, you have now gutted the Articles of Incorporation. And the Articles of Incorporation, it's not like they're equal weight to the bylaws. The Articles of Incorporation are what you must file and what the public has an absolute right to see and what careful donors want to see before they give money to make sure they're not donating to a fraud. This thing gutted its Articles of Incorporation. If we go to a little bit up the page here, above the language certified copy, you'll see when it was filed. It was filed at 2:20 p.m. on the 28th of April, 2005, if we believe that that stamp at the top is a legitimate stamp, which it may or may not be, right? So this tells you that there were no Articles of Incorporation for the entity beginning, sometimes it says it counts from the date it was filed. In other places I've seen it counts from the date the board acted on it. But in either case, from April 2005, the entity which the diary expert went on the board of in September, according to IAC, but actually on May 9th, 2011, had no articles, right? Are you doing that?
You could take your headphones
Oh, that's
out.
a good point. Thank you. Thought you were asking me.
I'm making faces at you.
I
over
thought you were
here,
asking me to do
Charles.
the Chelsea Clinton scarf routine, like through her head.
I did want to, not to interrupt, Charles, but you were asking about the lawyer for IAC. This gentleman is the chief legal counsel. Is he the guy who should have known all of this stuff?
He should, but typically what they do when they put a proxy statement together, because they're complicated, and this is a very complicated company, typically what you do is you hire outside counsel, and they study it very carefully. And when you're a director, you have an agreement. I've never been a director of a public company, but I've been a director of many other companies. And you tend to have some sort of engagement agreement wherein you agree that any disclosures you make that are going to be ultimately made by the company, you have an affirmative obligation to make sure they're true and correct. So in Chelsea's case, she's given the folks at Barry Diller and Company say, we're going to put you on the board because you're a keen intellect and your experience providing broad public policy prescriptions really through the Clinton Foundation. And maybe through her brief career, in quotes, as an Oxford graduate and health expert. So let's go then. This thing doesn't have, call it April 28th, 2005, doesn't have articles. So with that, it doesn't exist legally. Let's hit the bylaws for a second. It's up here for the top.
Yeah.
These bylaws were filed late on the 27th of June, 2017. And this at the very top calls itself Bill Hillary and Chelsea Clinton Foundation, DBA Clinton Foundation. Well, you don't, in New York, and even in Arkansas, you don't get to call yourself doing business as something without registering. And so here's something that was filed on the 27th of June, 2017. Chelsea's been on the board of IAC forever. She goes on the board of Expedia, I think, in 2017, from memory. And here they are defining this thing as DBA Clinton Foundation when that's not the case. And if you go to the very last, the end of it, page 23, you see when it was signed. Just if you could scroll to the very end. Or, a little bit higher, maybe. Higher, yeah. There you go.
Uh-huh.
This is signed on the 10th day of September, 2015. And it doesn't look to me like that's Bruce R. Lindsay's real...
But I feel like we've seen this so many times. Is this the same document?
It's the same document we've seen at different times. I think that that's somebody who signed to try to make it look like Bruce signed it, but maybe he did have a stroke in 2011, so it's possible that maybe his handwriting changed. But the point is, these were only submitted, this version was only submitted on the 10th day of September 2015. There was another version that was similar, that was submitted on this, I think around the second day or thereabouts of November 2013, which is not on file in New York, but should be on file. And if we go into this a little bit further up at the beginning, there's a discussion of the executive committee. There, slowly, let's see, further down, investment committee. Well, without belaboring the point, because there's some other documents I want to show you, people who want to read this, lawyers who want to read this, will discover that the bylaws of this entity were only amended lawfully, or an attempt to amend them lawfully, in November of 2013. That this thing operated without bylaws and without articles of incorporation from April 2005 until sometime in 2013. And they still have never adjusted the articles. So if you're going to make a claim that you're doing all this great work, the entity should possibly exist. So let's go into Barry Diller a little bit. If we go into ProPublica, we will look at the Diller Foundation.
What? Oh.
The Diller Foundation.
It went black for a second there.
See, now this says, you notice, the Diller Foundation doing business as Diller von Furstenberg Family Foundation. So there's something for 2010 before Chelsea goes on the board.
Why is it above all these others out of sequence?
I don't know. But isn't that interesting, right? There's the Diller Foundation, Then there's the Diller Foundation doing business as Diller von Furstenberg Family Foundation. Let's hit that Form 990 PDF and see what it looks like. How big is this thing?
Oh, right.
Right? So this thing has revenue of $7.4 million. This is for the calendar year 2010. And it makes grants of $7 million. And slowly going through this, it's had several gains. But I think it has to tell you the directors. And yeah, stop there. Information about officers, directors. How many directors do you see there?
Well, it says president, but I don't see a name.
Barry Diller.
Ah.
President. And how much time does he spend on it per week?
I can't really see.
0 hours a week.
Oh, wow. That's
funny. So he said, I've got one director. It's basically his money going into this thing. So a question for somebody like Victoria Bjorklund or her successor at Simpson Thacher or somebody else is going to be, is this entity truly independent from Barry Diller? He's providing all the money.
Well, he's spending 0 hours on it.
Spending no time on it. There are no other directors. Let's see if they disclose where the grants go. Because I didn't, when I looked at the version, if you just keep going down.
I got us a little jammed up here on
That's
the
right.
document. Let me just zoom out a bit. There we go.
All right, just keep going down. It typically, you have to give details on where grants went. Or see attachment 9, right? Grants approved, $7.2 million. Okay, and we go down to the...
What's this charitable...
They're saying it's a public charity that they're giving money to. Now let's see statement 9, if we could find it. Does it show you who those entities are? And this is Deloitte and Touche. Keep going. Here, slowly. Barry is contributing. This is cash of $2.7 million and non-cash of $4.7 million. Keep going. That's their Schedule B that gives Mead Johnson Nutrition Company as the cash. And that's received at the end of the year, exactly on the final day of the year. That's kind of interesting. Doesn't sound like tax planning to me.
Tax what?
Planning.
Right.
Give something away on the last day of the year. All right. Accounting fees, $9,000. Not a lot.
Seems low for millions of dollars worth of stuff.
Right. Well, that's if you don't want the accountant to actually do anything. All other related investments, depreciation, investments.
MasterCard.
Expedia. Land, nothing.
But doesn't it seem like they're giving a lot more, or is this what they're getting, or this is what they're giving?
This is what they own at the end of the year.
Mead Johnson Nutrition.
So, okay, registration fees. They've only paid $298 in registration fees. So in New York, you have to pay registration fees. Let's keep going. Do we see a list of grants?
No.
Is this a substantial contributor? He's the only contributor. Here's $10 paid to California.
That's the tax board, so I guess I don't understand.
That's the French. That's to register in California. But let's keep going down. Do we see anything about who these grants went to? Here's a fictitious business name. Wait a minute. Your Arrow
Investments. That's in the building as well. 555.
is doing business. See, this is what you have to file, what the Clinton Foundation has to file. Let's see if that comes up when we put this in later on. This was apparently signed in 99. Or here are the contributions. This was not somewhere else. Let's see the big ones. Friends of the High Line, $1 million.
Oh. They used to ask me for money all the time. Here's somebody giving $333,000.
Village Academies.
$34.
Yeah.
It would have been $33.
Vital Voices. This is allied to the Clinton Foundation. Hillary Clinton is honorary co-chair of Vital Voices. So when you talk about any relationships that you have in the proxy statement, you should be bringing that up. Not a lot of money, but nonetheless.
Polaris Project?
Don't know that
What's
one.
that?
Naked Heart Fund.
Mm-hmm.
Is Weinstein involved with that? And here's another Vital Voices for $5,000. Okay. See more. More. Wow. Lots of donations. What's this? $2 million for Friends of the High Line.
Comfort Zone Camp? What is that? Yeah,
I don't
2
know.
million Friends of the High Line.
Right. So, edible schoolyard. That's the last thing I'd
What?
want.
Where is that?
Edible schoolyard.
What the hell is that about?
I don't know. Another Vital Voices. 250. So a lot of that, and that needs to be.
Hey, Motion Picture and Television Fund. Is that the Academy?
I don't know. Tisch Schoolyards.
Chabad of Los Feliz. That's something in LA.
Yeah. So anyway, it'd be nice that he gave away this much money. Now
NYU.
Let's go into they say they filed that form, right? There's a copy of a form they say they filed. Let's exactly as it was written. The Diller hyphen. Let's go back into the Secretary of State.
Entity. Is that Charities Bureau?
We could do that one, or we could do entity search. Either one. We could do that one. Actually, we should do Secretary of State because that's where it would be registered. So it's New York, in Google, New York entity search. There you go. And punch in, please, just punch in T or anything for one, and it'll get you to the next page when you have to do it all over again. All right, now punch in, please, uppercase THEVON hyphen lowercase v. Oh, sorry, the Diller first. Diller with uppercase D, then dash Von, VON, and then uppercase F, URSTEN, BERG, and you're going to have BERG. And I think you're going to have to separate the N and the F there.
Oh.
Family Foundation. And then you put in 14409, and let's see what happens. Search the database. Okay. So there's nothing there.
Screw up the spelling?
No, there's nothing there. And that's interesting because that tells me that they're submitting a form claiming that they applied for the fictitious name, yet when you search in New York State, you don't find any evidence that that form hit New York State. If that's the case, if they are fudging things to say, that we have the right to use this name, but they haven't validly registered it in New York State, that's the kind of stuff that Tish James wipes the floor with the Trump Foundation over, right?
Trump Foundation, yes.
Right.
Also, I filed a DBA for my company when we switched from setting up computer networks to doing 3D movies, and the form had the seal of New York on it and
exactly.
all this stuff. It didn't look like that.
Right. That looks to me like just a form you might send in, but there's no evidence that it hit. Typically, you're going to see received New York State.
Raised seal on there and everything.
Right. So these shenanigans were going on. Let's go into this a bit. If you punch in to Google, October 27th, 2011.
27th?
Yeah. 2011, it doesn't have to be with the TH, just 2011, and Barry Diller, what comes up?
Sexy all-boy Thanksgiving?
No, 20 million gift to Highline Park.
Ah.
Okay. And who is it saying it went from?
Well,
The Diller von Furstenberg Family Foundation made the gift. Okay? That thing does not seem, as far as I could tell, to actually be registered in it. And it could be that the New York State site is broken or they didn't catch the form and maybe this is all innocent. But when I approached the Secretary of State and called the Secretary of State to figure out whether the Clinton Foundation had any fictitious names, I was authoritatively told on the phone and then via email that it has no fictitious names registered. So my suspicion it has none registered in New York. Now, maybe you're going to look the other way because it's a large amount of money, and you say, oh, okay, well, we'll figure out how to fudge the books on this. So October 26th, this story comes. What happens on October 27th involving the Clinton Foundation?
I don't know.
If we go back to the Podesta WikiLeaks and we punch on Simpson Thatcher spelled properly, and we have the results come back in chronological order, take the T out of that one, yeah. And have the results come by. You have this thing, release date. You see this thing down here? You can hit that arrow, and oldest first. No, not release date, oldest first. Let's email date, oldest first. Okay, let's see what happens. What happens? October 31st, 2011. So Chelsea has gone on the board in September of 2011. October 27th, this entity that's not registered properly
Gives $20 million to
gives
the
$20
Heinlein.
million, and then Chelsea's on the board, and now they're studying, Simpson Thatcher is studying the Clinton Foundation.
And here's Valerie Bjorklund.
Victoria.
Victoria, sorry.
And AJ66.
And Cheryl Mills.
And AJ66 is Chelsea Clinton.
Yeah, it's a weird email address for her.
Right. All right, so if you go down the page a little bit, I think this thing, well, people in their own time can go and look. There's quite a few pieces of information here, including a bill that recites when they first became involved. It was October 27th, 2011 that they started on this thing. The same date that the gift was announced from an entity that now was, tied to IAC and tied to Chelsea Clinton, who had served on the board of IAC for about a month in this time frame. And as a guess, if we had a real FBI that was not the Federal Bureau of Inactivity when it came to the Clintons. Incompetence. But we had somebody to sweat Barry Diller, Simpson Thatcher, the accounting firms, and made them go back and explain what exactly was Simpson Thatcher hired to do in October of 2011. Why did Simpson Thatcher, what did review by Simpson Thatcher encompass domestic matters only, or did they go into international matters? Why, on the basis of a bill that approached over $100,000, why did Simpson Thatcher not see the obvious frauds that the Clinton Foundation was in the midst of perpetrating, in that it wasn't registered, it wasn't operating, it didn't have audits, none of the filings were accurate? And here Chelsea is deriving something of substantial economic benefit. The IAC relationship that she got at exactly this time has translated into stock, which is worth $20 million today, and that's roughly 10 years later. So that's $2 million a year work, part-time, for somebody with broad public policy experience and a keen intellect. It sounds to me that the experience that she has is using the Clinton last name and just waiting for the gifts to roll in.
Well, I mean, to me, this looks like the evil Popeye right here. I don't know.
Yeah, it's not a flattering look.
No. But what is this SV18? Any idea?
I have no clue. No clue.
It's Fox, which he was the co-founder of.
Of the network. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, enough just amplification of what we were talking about.
There's Diane von Furstenberg.
Right. The lovely Diane von Furstenberg. But this area where people who are financially sophisticated, like Barry Diller, will look at charities as a way of virtue signaling, as a way of also doing good work, but as a way of currying favor with influential politicians who can make investigations disappear, who can make political enemies disappear, who could open up opportunities in New York State and New York City, is chump change to give Vital Voices a couple $300,000 a year and give.
What is Vital Voices?
It's yet another charity that sounds important to me. It's vital.
Yeah.
It's freaking vital. And it's one of these things that Hillary was involved with, Madeline Not So Bright was involved with it, and Republicans are involved with it, and it's basically a charity to promote women's voices around the world. And it sounds good in theory, but like the other Clinton Foundation-related charities, it has not disclosed its interrelationships with the Clinton mess properly. The benefits that people in Vital Voices have derived personally are not properly disclosed, and it's another mess. We've saved the best mess for almost last. We're not going to cover it today. But it's yet another example of we really know how to screw things up in charity land because we're the Clintons.
Well, we need to learn more about this Diller von Furstenberg Foundation. It's interesting. Didn't we see some blank filings from them and a lot of interesting, unusual? I mean,
right.
At what point can we conclude that they're on the same exact program the Clintons are?
Well, again, we talked about this early on. There's the business model for charity fraud that if you live in Washington D.C. or you live in New York City or you live in Los Angeles, you are subject to very high taxes.
Yeah.
Unlike Gates, there's no personal income tax in Washington State. But if you live in those three cities I mentioned, and by some miracle manage to become a billionaire, particularly with publicly traded stock, there is an opportunity, and I'm not saying Diller is doing this, but there is certainly an opportunity to create leaky charities and donate, in theory, as Bill Gates does, stock, appreciated stock in companies that you still have an interest in, to the charity, control the charity. So the stock is really going from your left pocket to your right pocket, but you fill out a piece of paper saying you donated it, and then on your tax return, depending on what type of charity it is, you can write the value of the gift off and reduce your taxes by large amounts of money.
I've been doing some homework, Charles, while you weren't around. Did you know about this?
I did not.
That's why I wanted to show it to you, because, see, I don't know what these things mean, but it seems to me that if in 2004 he wanted to break up IAC, splitting off his travel business into the new publicly traded Expedia, it feels like there's something going on here.
Well, so why you would do that, it was a sensible thing to do back then. Why you would do that is if you've got a complicated organization, take a GE as an example. In the 60s, it was the rage to be complicated. The idea was that if you had a complex mess, if your suntan lotion business went down because it was raining, your umbrella business would make money, and you put the whole mess together and don't look too closely at the sausages and the goulash and how they're made. But over time, as the quality of information that was disclosable to the public improved, people began to realize that it's complex things get traded at a discount. So I think this probably was the correct idea back in 2004. Take this mess, and you've got something that's an easily understandable business, Expedia, new age internet travel business. Makes sense. Priceline worked. Other things worked. So it's probably sensible to put the two apart. What you've got to be really careful, though, about doing is this type of business is you don't want to, for example, collect, as Chelsea is doing, directorship fees from Expedia and directorship fees from IAC, neither of which are justified based on her lack of experience, indeed her incompetence. I mean, with public companies, you're not really supposed to do that, i.e. publicly traded companies, because you're not in the business of doing favors for friends. If you want, with a private company, you also have to be careful about how you do it, but if you want to employ a boyfriend or a girlfriend or your cat, not your cat, but somebody on terms that are, let's say, difficult to justify, you can try doing it and chances are it'll fall through the cracks. But in a publicly traded company, it's really tough to say that I put on my board as the only young person somebody who, when she came under fire for her cavalier attitude towards getting
got fired.
God said, I don't really care about money.
Right.
I mean, that's not the
Sounds
kind of
like
person.
The person you want on the board of your public company.
Maybe a foundation, maybe, but certainly not. If you're giving away your money, you could say maybe, all right, I'll do that, but not in a publicly traded company.
What about this, Charles? This article from the Rupert Murdoch Journal says that IAC is a bit of a fixer-upper. See, I'm very interested in how these media moguls interact with one another.
This is a recent article.
I know, and they're saying it's a fixer-upper. Part of the reason I've become even aware of this IAC is because of a little dust-up that's happening with the Vimeo account right now that is irritating some of the sponsors of Crowdsource the Truth by limiting their access to some of the older videos. So I've made a couple statements to people about that. Got an email from somebody this morning. They're trying to look at something called, all those videos are backed up and stored and will be accessible again, but I apologize to sponsors, current sponsors, and future sponsors. They're not accessible temporarily, but I'm building a whole new video host that will be just for Crowdsource the Truth, sponsor exclusive shows, and all the videos will return once that's complete. So please don't give up on me.
Yeah, and you're making real progress on that. That's something
Yes.
that you've got multiple workarounds. So I think there's a lot more we're going to say. We're sitting here now on a Wednesday after the start of autumn. So Barr had assured us that Durham would do something before the end of summer, and that did not happen.
Right.
So I'm not at a stage yet where I want to call bull on Durham, but that's a little bit.
I don't think it's Durham's fault.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think it's the boss, because we were talking last night on More Pain that I forget her last name.
Nora
Delaney?
Dennehy.
Dennehy, yeah, quit, and apparently it's because of some, Durham wants to do something that Barr says don't do it, and this woman quit.
Well, there's several. There are several theories on that. Another theory is that she needed to leave at this time for some reason to get a pension somewhere else. There are benign explanations and there are nefarious explanations. I think, for me, the fact that so many Democrats are pounding the table late last week saying we absolutely need to impeach Durham and Barr and have investigations in the House and the Senate tells me they're way over the target and something is coming down. We need, I think, to give them time. The report that came out on Hunter today is devastating. It's the kind of thing where you sit and you say, what's her name? The one who, senior, Kellyanne Conway, when her 15-year-old girl is going full Greta Thunberg on you, or Lundberg or whatever her name is. You reach a certain point where you say, I've got to get out of the race, get out of this stuff, and pay attention to my family. I mean, Hunter is a seriously damaged human being.
Young man, yeah.
Now father of yet another child. Right, and the correct thing for the Biden family to do is to go slowly into the night, because should this guy show up in his boxing outfit on the September 29th, it's going to be like when, I was having nightmares about having to box these athletic kids when I was a string bean at age...
What boxing outfit is Hunter Biden going to have?
No, Biden, when he goes out for the debate against Trump. It's not going to be...
Two hits, Charles.
It'll be bang, zoom, Jackie Gleason.
One hitting him and then him hitting the floor.
To the moon.
I mean, seriously, if there were a Trump child with a drug problem who was accused, it would be non-stop news cycle.
Right. Well,
crackhead Trump.
Yeah, I mean, it's very clear that in the one hand, on the Trump administration, you have a team that started the administration wealthy, unlike the Clintons and the Bidens and the Bushes for that matter. They did not arrive to the White House, the others, with take Trump's reported wealth divided by 10, say it's only $1 billion. Very few presidents, maybe the Kennedys, but it wasn't John who had the money. Donald Trump has control over at least $1 billion, maybe 10, as he says. So he arrived rich. He is, unlike the Clintons, he's not currently scamming book deals.
Stealing furniture.
He's giving his entire salary away. Yeah. He's giving the profits of his hotels away. He's doing bending over backwards. Now, of course, it's a rich family. Once he leaves, ultimately, whether it's this January or 4 Januaries from now, of course, the Trump name will be a far more valuable entity.
There's no way around it, though.
Right, that's just life. I mean, but what he's been doing has been benefiting this country economically and in many other ways. And it's really just a shame to see, on the one hand, you have a team desperately trying to drain the swamp, and the other team saying, we kind of like the swamp.
They're filling it back up.
We want the swamp.
Yeah.
So it's swamp versus anti-swamp.
Well, but Charles, what do you think about calls for an investigation into an investigation that was investigating an investigation? Yeah, when will it stop?
I think they need to grow up. Now, maybe on a hopeful note, if you Google Scott Adams, and Trump landslide, there's a very good tweet. And this is, I think, the guy who does Dilbert, or did Dilbert.
But now he's more famous for being just a kind of a podcaster. Here he is. Well, it's probably easier.
Yeah, that's it. Trump landslide. And I don't know if you maybe scroll down his page a little bit, you'll get to the actual video you put out. But it's quite good, actually, I think. So I'd like to leave.
I don't know where that went. Let me see if I can find it here. Sorry.
It's on my Twitter feed.
Yeah, it'd be easier to find that way.
Which, incidentally, for some reason, I'm getting more followers.
Well, they're just probably distracted, blocking other people temporarily. But you know, Charles, viewers of Sunday with Charles, and Charles Ortel is closing in, can follow you on Twitter if they want. Oh, congratulations on 40,000, Charles.
Well, and look, I'm following 20 people.
Perfect. And then,
this is the report that just came out.
Oh,
This is pathetic. I mean, to think at her stage, I mean, I don't know what's more pathetic, Biden running or Hillary doing a podcast, and then choosing to do it. The first podcast is going to be on September 29th. That's the date they created, illegally incorporated, September 29th, 2009, Chai.
we should see if we can be guests on there.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure we can. This is it, right here. This is the video. Yeah.
There you go.
It's really fantastic. And it's already, I think it went up this morning and has 89,000 views already.
Wow.
So with that, Jason.
Yeah, very good episode, Charles. It was interesting to meet George, and people can certainly purchase his book. We will return on Sunday. I think we are, it's amazing that the summer is already over, Charles, and soon we will be probably too cold before you know it to do these walk-arounds. We've got a few more months, but this hearing, this ruling, what was it, the finding in the Breonna Taylor trial, everybody seems poised to receive riots tonight.
I hope not. I mean, it is distressing to see the degree to which irresponsible people are fanning the flames of division here. And here, when we go back to Barack Obama's history, his book is coming out, of course, after the election, Volume 1, also known as Volume I.
That's what he's calling it, Volume 1?
No, it's called The Promised Land, a very modest approach. And so that's coming out. If he really wanted to burnish his credentials and have a great legacy, at this stage he'd wake up and say, you know what, I did screw up. And he would stand up, as Bill Clinton tried to do with the Sister Soldier moment in 91 or 92, whenever it was, and stood up to the rap music, violence, and all that kind of stuff. He should stand up, Barack Obama, if he had it in his heart, and say, listen, reasonable people can disagree about the future of this country, but we need to remember we're the richest country on earth. The poorest people in this country are richer by far, economically and in other ways, and better protected than an overwhelming majority of souls that are on the planet now and that have ever lived.
Yeah.
And so let's stop whipping from the pulpits that exist in the financially well-endowed universities and private schools around this country. Let's stop with the scruffy look. Let's stop with the wool hats and the skateboards and every systemic racism arguments that are just not grounded in any fact. And let's start from a positive place. We've done a lot right. Everybody makes mistakes. The key is whether you learn from them. Stuck on stupid Biden does not learn from his mistakes.
No.
And Barack Obama should get up there and give a fair plea for people to stand the F down. And he should call out Black Lives Matter because it's a communist front organization. Will he do that?
Hell no.
Of course not.
Because he's a communist and he wants all this to happen.
Right.
If he wasn't directly involved in making it happen.
Right. But I do like there is a fair amount of, there is a God, I think, out there, or at least a force to balance this stuff out. And Alyssa Milano was all for defunding the police until she needed to call the police recently. It turned out that she was concerned that rioters were going to tear her house down or something. It was like a 14-year-old kid with an air gun shooting cans.
Which is pretty stupid to do given everything that's going on. Like, I think I'll go outside and just shoot a bunch of stuff.
I know kids, though, with guns. I remember as a young kid, when the days gone by, you could play with cap guns. I mean, and that's just what you did. You played cowboys versus Indians, and we did that every day after school.
Yeah, but I mean, when I was a kid, there were already stories in the news of the cops shooting kids with toy guns, and now it's like, shouldn't do that.
But there's just my kids were growing up. I remember we lived on this big property, and so we could do what we wanted, basically, within reason. And we were shooting BB guns at cans when my kids I had them on motorcycles when they were like 8 and 9 years old.
You should have gone over to Alyssa Milano's house.
That's right.
But I mean, the the meat of that story is that she's like, defund the police, but we need the police. I mean, I think defunding the police is the absolute opposite of what we need to be doing. I think we need to look at the police where there's waste. I think other members of the government might be sending money to inappropriate things within the police, but I mean, auditing something, improving the efficiency of something, improving the training of something, improving the laws around it, I could be all for that. But just saying, oh, let's throw out the baby with the bathwater, just get rid of the police, it's absurd.
Of course it's absurd. And it just betrays a complete lack of understanding of how life works. There is a criminal element. The notion that you are going to convert a Bernie Madoff, or I love that guy. Who is the guy, ZZZ Top, the guy who... Eddie Antar, Eddie Antar perpetrated a big fraud, Antar, and he served time in prison, and then he got involved counseling people.
Crazy Eddie?
Yeah, I think, was it Crazy Eddie? Eddie Antar, Antar.
It brought up Crazy Eddie. I used to love that store when I was a kid.
Yeah, Eddie Antar, I think, went to prison, and then he had a second career as a reformed counselor for people who might be doing fraud, and then he committed fraud again.
That doesn't seem... No, it is. The Brooklyn-born man who created the chain of Crazy Eddie electronics stores, only to watch it collapse when an underlying fraud was exposed. Yeah.
But there are people who are just serial fraudsters. They cannot... There's a screw loose. They cannot tell the truth. They don't see a problem with it. And similarly, there are career criminals. They're just people who... That's how they roll. And when in a big country like the United States with a lot of wealth and a lot of opportunity to sell drugs, engage in loan sharking, you name the businesses, by saying you're going to abandon the police, the criminals say, well, that's great, let's move to New York.
Exactly, and Seattle. I see all their out-of-state license plates around. Right. While you're talking about the chronically fraudulent, this guy, Trevor Milton...
Yeah, I see Elizabeth Holmes.
Right, of electric cars or hydrogen vehicles. He has had a number of frauds. And this is quite interesting because I don't know if it was yesterday or earlier today, but, what do you call it? The Tesla had their long anticipated battery day where they announced a pretty significant manufacturing breakthrough for batteries that are going to have potentially a huge impact on electric cars of the future. And then shortly after, Tesla was hacked. Owners of Tesla cars were not able to get into their car. And I'll tell you, Charles, it just seems, I don't have any evidence of this, but that seems mighty coincidental that when this company that is disrupting one of the largest markets in consumer spending announces a product that if they weren't a decade ahead of the industry already, this puts them 2 decades ahead of the industry. And then the confidence in their product is shaken by this hack. That seems mighty coincidental to me. It's almost like when I have a PDF document on my computer that contains damning evidence of criminal activity, and then I go to look at it again the next day and it's corrupted. That could be a coincidence, but it could be someone deliberately going into my computer and doing something to the document.
Right. Well, but on Elizabeth Holmes, on, frankly, Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, extravagant claims, unfortunately, attract ardent supporters. When you hear Bernie Madoff, when I first heard of this idea that you could have high return, low risk, consistent investments, but don't ask me to look at any details. Or you see it now on Fox, and the advertisements on Fox are getting worse and worse. Now you have feminine hygiene cleansing products, and you got bent crank disease, and you got all this stuff. Then you have advertisements for something that's going to do.
I don't know why you're not a doctor.
10% cash flow returns from property in this market. Monthly 10% cash flow returns, it's unlikely. And then they say, we have tremendous experience. Why? We have $1 billion worth of properties. $1 billion worth of properties is nothing in the industry. It is not, anyway, this Theranos thing was a complete fraud.
Well, I was going to ask you, when the CEO and founder of a tech startup company deletes his entire Twitter account and tells you they're not the next Theranos. I know you don't like to give investment advice, Charles, but what do you think of that?
Yeah, it's ridiculous. You look. This is what I'm talking about. This is a clean Scruffy. I mean, he's not that bad, the beard, but they have the funny shirts and the funny jackets, and look at his cuffs. What's going on with that? It looks like there's an old-fashioned clothespin.
Yeah, what's he doing with the clothespin?
and if a story sounds too good to be true, it's false, most likely.
Yeah.
And in the health field with what's her name, Theranos,
Elizabeth
Holmes, she had no graduate degrees, no business training. She had an ability to go somehow and meet with all these older men, George Schultz and other people, and put them on the board.
Oh.
And so now you got a board of advisors of the former Secretary of State and Henry Kissinger maybe and other people like that.
Wasn't Mattis on the board?
Was he on the board of Theranos?
I think so.
Was he? Yeah.
What, James Mattis, Theranos.
Really? Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
And
what do we think? It's amazing when I know something that you
There
don't,
you go.
Charles. I get a
there you go. You get a lot
sticker.
of brownie points there.
Time to talk about James Mattis' involvement with the Theranos scandal.
Yeah. Matthew Iglesias, I think his brother went to Horace Mann when I was there. But yeah, I mean, these people who put together story investment opportunities, and I remember the funniest one I ever was involved with was my business partner, whose name I will not use. This does not reflect well on him. He was a gadget guy. His family had financed Thomas Edison way back, and it's a long old school family. So everything was a new gadget. You know, oh, look at this guy! Look at this! Look at that! Look at this fantastic!
One of them light bulbs,
right? You know, and so we had this. The rubber's going to meet the road on meeting. You know, you show us how this thing works, and we have experts looking at it, and the guy's going this and that, and look what it does, and this is fantastic, and all this kind of stuff. And I said, look, I'm not much of a technology expert, but generally, a device like this, it seems to be powered. Does it need to be plugged in? And this isn't plugged in. So how is it doing all this stuff?
Right.
Right.
How was it?
It was a fraud, complete fraud.
But I mean, how could it be a fraud without electricity?
Batteries or something.
Because that was the problem they had with this Nikola truck, is that someone was like, what's that plug underneath it? Right. He's like, pay no attention to that.
Yeah. Or with Joe Biden, pay no attention to the earbud in the debate, because I'm getting the answers and the questions.
Right, earbud. That's what all those Black Lives Matters guys had, those little radio earbuds in. And when I asked them, what's the radio doing in your ear? He was like, what radio?
What yellow vest?
What yellow vest? Exactly what I was thinking. Well, Charles, it's been another great episode. I do want to encourage people to become sponsors on subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth and patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. New shows are still coming, and what have we got? Today is Wednesday, right?
So
that week is really moving quickly. Time flies when you're locked in your apartment.
Right. We are expecting, Cheryl Atkinson put out a tweet yesterday saying the wind is finally blowing, suggesting things are going to happen. We have, I hope, different things coming out in the media. I have a piece I hope that will air tomorrow. And we will see. We're now very few days till the election.
Yeah.
We have in Donald Trump and his family people who understand that if they lose, they're going to jail because the other side
will find something.
Exactly, and will drain them of a lot of cash. And on the other hand, have some real ideas about how to run this country better and do good things. Whereas out of Biden, what's his idea? Waking up?
Doing push-ups against Kim Jong-un and telling him to listen, fat. Is he dead yet? Kim Jong-un, I thought there was mysteriously...
Well, there are reports out of South Korea yesterday that South Korea is proposing ending the war with North Korea.
And merging?
And committing to ending the war. They're a party to the war and we're a party to the war.
Wow.
And proposing that the peninsula itself be denuclearized, and so they're ahead of us on that. Our position is...
That's good.
Well, I think our position is that we want North Korea to be denuclearized, but South Korea to have nukes. which could be the final thing that you trade away to get this across the line. So that's good progress. The Nobel Peace decision will be made in due course, October 9th, I think. So there's a lot to look forward to here. We got the debate on the 29th of September, and if it doesn't happen, we will have to do an alternative view of that debate. I think prior to the debate, it might even be this Saturday, Jim Carrey is going to be on Saturday Night Live playing Biden. And I think when he sticks to acting, he's freaking hilarious.
Yes.
But when he gets into politics, he proves he's lost his mind.
Yeah.
So
with that, we will bid our viewers adieu and see everybody soon. Thanks for watching.